Hi, Misha here, and Hobby Master is a brand I really like. They're not too expensive, although, on the higher end, but they're also durable, and they do a lot in 1/72 scale diecast, which is primarily what I collect. Corgi is another series I like. Unfortunately, some of the other brands, even ones more expensive, I find to be a little too delicate. Hobby Masters, well, obviously you can break anything, but they're nice and sturdy. And I got into the Hobby Master brand some time ago, 2016 maybe. So I'm not going to say I've been in it the longest, but a couple of years now. I discovered it well before COVID, which was when a lot of people were at home and found various hobbies. But my entire point, one of their earliest toolings that I did miss out on was their Bell UH-1 Iroquois. But as we know it, the Huey. Finally, in 2023, they've released not one, but two new variants in the series. And while I was really just going to pick one up, I decided to get both because I found a good Easter deal at Pete's Collectibles. And if I bought the pair, free shipping, and he knocked a couple extra bucks off. We have two similar but different models here, and both are from Vietnam. This is from 1962 and is a UH-1B, or is it A? We'll get to that. The other one is from 1970, and this is a UH-1C. And considering the cavalry kind of stopped operations around 1971, it's a pretty late Vietnam, and this represents early. And these are the shorter cabin, single engine variants of the Huey, a family that was produced for 30 years, and thousands upon thousands were built, and it's just super iconic. And it was the U.S. Army's first mass-produced, mass-used turboshaft engine helicopter. Before that, it was piston. A lot to be said about the Huey. It and the AH-1 Cobra, those are the most iconic. Now, if only Hobby Master would do an AH-1, I would love that. They do the Apache, so come on, guys, why not? Anyway, let's dive in, talk about these, and some pros and cons to the tooling, because like I said, it is an older tooling, and in some ways it does show. And am I happy I bought these? Well, let's hang out and talk about Hueys. Haven't had it out in a minute. I had to look for the spinny thing. And on it, we have the first one. The UH-1A, or is it a UH-1B? We'll get to that. First, history. I'm not going to go a deep dive because we've done Huey videos, but anywho, this was kind of an outgrowth of Korea. 1952-53, the U.S. Army, it needed a new medical evacuation, ambulance, transport type helicopter. And so contracts were, they offered a competition, and of course, Bell would enter and win in 1955 with its entry. Initially designated as the XH-40, the first prototype flew in October of 1956. It would be followed by two other XH-40 prototypes, and these were important because these were the first production type, or at least destined for production, turboshaft engine helicopters the U.S. Army would ever have. And not only did they pass the initial testing, they exceeded their original hopes. Next would be about a half a dozen YH-40 pre-production models. And they would tinker with the design a bit. And in 1959, it would be officially adopted for service, not as the UH-1, but as the HU-1A. And in 1960, they started to deliver these, and they would go into service with the 101 Airborne, the 82, and yes, the 57th Medical, detachment, who was actually the first to deploy these in Vietnam long before the war was officially going. In fact, the first ones were sent over in March of 1962, and later that year would see field use. Again, medical, so yeah. They would soon be followed by some transport utility versions late that year. Now, why HU-1 versus UH-1? Well, in September of 1962, names changed. We've seen it with all kinds of aircraft. Well, it also impacted helicopters. So this is actually where Huey comes from, UH-1 versus HU-1, Huey. You get the idea. Yeah, officially this was the Iroquois, but it was the Huey. Now, A versus B. A was the initial version, but B would come out soon after. Now, according to Hobby Master, this is of a B, but they also date it 1962 in medical. The problem is, while the 57th did operate the B, they didn't have any in Vietnam until 1963, as best I know. I could be wrong. So I'm not entirely sure what you want to say about that. Technically, it probably should be an A. What's the difference? Well, once they started getting him into the field, they discovered that it was a little underpowered, especially when fully lifting in different environments. So primarily, switch from A to B was an uprated engine. They also expanded the cabin by a few inches, allowing 7 passengers to fit in, plus the 2 in the front, the crew. They also went to a 44-foot rotor span. They stretched out the cord a bit, and they put the rotors up about a foot higher off the cabin. All things done to improve lift, carrying capacity, what have you. Just little tweaks. Originally, they had ordered 1,010 of the HU-1As, later UH-1As. And the first prototypes of the improved B model were in 1961. They started to be delivered to the U.S. Army in later part of 1962. And like I said, by 63, we see these in Vietnam. So make up your own mind. At this scale, it's really hard to measure things of inches. But I will say, it's a nice model. We've got antenna in the front. We've got antenna in the back. Of course, we have fully rotating propellers. And it comes with a nice stand. It can also sit on its skids. The stand fits quite well. Not too tight, not too loose. Let's see here. Well, now I said that. When I was doing it on the car, when I was doing it on another surface, it did. I guess on this, it's a little uneven. There we go. But yeah, if you set it on a wood shelf, it balances fine on the skids. And of course, this is unarmed, being medical. It's an evac. You see the turbo shaft engine there. About 57 feet overall. 8.5 feet wide. Top speed of about 135 miles per hour, cruising at around 120. Max altitude of around 19,000 feet. Can be operated by as few as 1 person, although usually you at least have a crew of 2. Yeah. This is diecast, at least part of it. One nice thing, the rotors are of course plastic, but actually this shaft is metal. Part of it anyway, which gives it a good spin. You can feel some weight. The main body is metal. The tail, going back to here, is metal. But then, of course, this part of the tail goes to being plastic. The rear rotor moves as well, of course. The skids are plastic, which I get to do that. And the nose is plastic. And one reason, aside from just, they usually do plastic noses, this allows them to make the mold modular. Because if this was all metal in one piece, they'd have to have whole different molds for differences. But now they can just replace the nose to give it different looks. And of course, it's painted up in the Army's medical. And the original I guess you call it short cabin versions, single engine versions, would serve in Vietnam. They would be replaced in the medical role by more advanced models eventually, being shifted to other utility purposes. But, and of course, the B would continue to get power plant upgrades at least 2 or 3 times, giving it better lift and all that good stuff. So I do like it, but you can tell it's their earlier tooling. For one, you don't have opening canopies, you don't have pilot figures. I may try to pop this nose off and see if I can put a pilot in there. But the early Hobby Masters did not have pilots. But it does feel better than, say, I don't know, IXO. Just, yeah, smoother, and it does come pre-assembled. The blades are already on it. And again, the stand is perfectly good. So that's the early medical version. Now this was the one I knew I wanted as pre-order, because while I have a few other Hueys from some of the cheaper brands, none of them are armed. Nickname for the transport and medicals were slick-sided. This is a hog version with weapons on the side. Also, I've seen them called frogs, especially the marine variant. But the UH-1C hog. Basically, it's the same aircraft as the B. But as early as 1960, 1961, they wanted to make an upgraded version that could carry weapons, had a more useful payload. Regular Huey, it's hard to say with the various engines and things, but it could carry around 3,800, 3,900 pounds. Putting an upgraded engine in here and going to a revised tail system, they were able to bump that to about 4,600, edging on 4,700 pounds. Cabin and all that's about the same, but they, of course, had to install the new engine. They also added some dust filters to the engine for combat use and hot and dry, and they added some redundant hydraulics and other systems in case, well, they get shot in combat. But they really couldn't do much in the way of armoring it, because this was always an interim solution. You're taking a medical utility helicopter and trying to make it into combat. Even though this was slightly faster, slightly more maneuverable, and even carried a little bit more fuel, it was still what it was. Now, it was just an interim thing until the UH-1G, the Cobra, was available. And even though development started way back in the early 60s, these did not go into production until June of 1966, when Vietnam was really heating up. It's also worth pointing out that back in 1963, the long cabin version, the Delta, the D, started to go into service. It could carry up to 15 people, although the idea was a crew of 4 and 8 to 10 armed soldiers, and had upgraded engines and better door systems and door gunners. So what they did is they used the shorter frames for more and more the gunship role, giving the longer frames for medical and transport. It makes perfect sense. So even then it was kind of being pressed into a secondary role as an attack ship. So what do we have? Well, the primary armament, these could carry 7.62 308 machine guns and or 2.75-inch 70mm rocket pods, which this has them on the sides. And that's basically it. You know, it could go in and deliver some fire support, do some escort duty. And they would build 766 of these for a couple of years, again, until the Cobra started to be delivered. The vast majority would go to the U.S. Army, although the Australian Navy would pick up 5, and Norway would pick up 5. Just worth pointing out. So, over 750 in U.S. Army service, and it did well for what it was. Can't really complain. The model, of course, is essentially the same as the first one. Pop it off here. You notice these stick in quite well. It doesn't have the same nose though. Smoother here. Then we have the pods on the side here. They're not detachable, they come pre-installed. And the tail is also different, as it should be. Different antenna. Because it is a somewhat improved later version, plus completely different combat role. But yeah, these would be used by AirCav. And this particular model is from 1970. These would be taken out of theater in 1971, so they operated for about 5 years total. The civilian version of these was known as the Bell 204B. Either one. And it's basically the same helicopter as for the military, but with more civilian safety systems and just, qualified for that. If I get this tiny little hole, which is nice. The hole's not readily apparent on the bottom of these. Pretty nice. And of course, a lot of 204s were sold around the world. And it doesn't end there. The U.S. Marines purchased a version known, it was basically the B, but changed it a little bit for the Marines. That's where the frog comes from. It was known as the UH-1E. And a short time later, in 1963-64, the U.S. Air Force purchased a version with their uprated engine they specified, and it was known as the UH-1F. And actually, the Air Force F would serve for quite a long time. So yeah, the A, B, C, E, and F were all pretty well derivative of each other, with the D starting the long cabin version. And then, of course, you get into the UH-1N series, which was kind of Generation 2, but outside the scope of this here video. But what do you think of this Hobby Master C? I'm happy to have an armed up Huey. Very iconic for Nam. Although I wouldn't mind if they did a Delta version complete with door gunner. That would be pretty cool, frankly. Get on it, Hobby Master. Nah, I'm really happy they brought this tooling back out. So to end, am I glad I bought these? Or did I wish I'd bought just one? Not really. This shows it in both of its roles. Medical and gunship. Very iconic, both Vietnam. And Hobby Master has not released Huey in a number of years. You can tell it's older tooling. It just doesn't have quite the dynamic stuff, opening or doors or canopies, removable pilots, even optional ordnance. But they're also not charging over $100. I think these I got for $70, $65. Not cheap, but heck, even the cheapest, like Americam and stuff, are $25, $30 now, and this is definitely a higher quality. Plus, I'm just a sucker for a Huey, and these blades really do spin very nicely because they're weighted. The tails spin. And they come completely pre-assembled. You don't have to do anything except put them on their stand. So yeah. I like helicopters. And the Hueys are nice because they're only having 2 blades. They don't take up a ton of space. But 4-bladed helicopters take up a lot of shelf room, guys. Unfortunately. But yeah, I wanted to share these with you. Again, 1/72 scale diecast. And I might try to fit a pilot inside one later if I get brave enough. I don't know if those the noses just snap in. I don't see a screw, so we'll see. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do you like either of these, or maybe you think they're cheesy? I don't know. But they're a good size in this scale. Much smaller You'd lose detail, but much larger. I've tried the 1/48 scales, and they're just very, very big. Kind of like miniatures. Anyway, appreciate you hanging out and talking Hueys with me today. And the most important fact to know about the Huey, Sulu knew how to fly one. Star Trek 4. Boy chum. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.